Michael Conforti was brought up in Brooklyn, New York. He received a bachelor's and master's degree in psychology at Goddard College and went on to become a Jungian psychoanalyst. He is the founder and director of the Assisi Conference and Seminar Series and a faculty member at Antioch, New England, and the Jung Institutes in New York and Boston. Conforti has been in private practice as a psychoanalyst for over 25 years. He lectures internationally and has authored numerous articles and recently a book, Field, Form, and Fate, Patterns in Mind, Psyche, and Matter. A novel thinker, Mr. Conforti was given a Vision Award from the National Association for the Advancement of Psychoanalysis. He lives in Brattleboro. Thank you for coming up.
It's my pleasure. Good morning.
Okay, great. So when did you know you wanted to be an analyst?
Well, I did volunteer work at Willowbrook State Hospital in New York when I was about 18 years old. And I watched these kids. These kids were just so disturbed. They were in the back wards about 5, 6, 7 years. And I would watch them, and two kids in particular. One I'll never forget. He would go out every day and get flowers, go to the flower garden, and he would make a wreath of flowers, like a crown, and put it on his head. And something about him changed. And I thought, I wasn't thinking Jungian psychology or anything, but I said, there's something about that activity that gives this kid some kind of peace. And I thought, if I could ever understand what it is that happens through that symbolic attachment to that kind of activity, I thought it would be a wonderful contribution to make and something I wanted to learn. So that was really one of the early stages for me.
Now, and then you go to Zurich and knock on the door of the Jungian Institute. Now, what led you to do that? That was a bold move.
Well, in my second year of college, I went to City University in New York. I was taking a course in personality theory, and the teacher mentioned two words, alchemy and anima. I had no idea what the words meant. But I've had in my life a few words that have done it to me. I said, this is going to be part of my future, and I want to pursue it. So I was at Goddard College later, after my third year, and we were able to go away for like 3 or 4 months at a time. So where are you going to go? I said, I don't know. I'm going to go to Zurich. You're going to be an analyst? I'm going to be an analyst. So I sent some money over to become an analyst, so I thought. And a friend of mine, we went over together, and they go literally knocking on the door and say, you're Conforti, huh? I said, yes, I am. Feeling kind of proud. You're a 19-year-old kid going to begin his training. And he said, well, why don't you go home? Come back when you're like 26, 27 years old. But if you want, since you're here, go do a Jung tour. You know, go look at the Jung Tower, Jung's house, and read some books. But somehow I knew it was part of my life. And an interesting sequel to that, I went back I began my training when I was 26 in New York, and about maybe 9 years ago, I was invited to give lectures in Switzerland. And it was a tremendous sense of a homecoming.
I bet.
It was incredible.
Now, so you were at Goddard during those golden years. I think Mamet was there. I mean, this is what, the early 70s? Or
Yeah.
Wild time. So what was that like?
Goddard College saved my life, I'll tell you that. From personal, I was growing up in New York, a big Italian neighborhood, with certain parameters growing up like that. But my mind always took me in other domains. So I met a teacher in New York that was teaching up in Vermont. And said, let me come up with you. I heard about these experimental colleges. So I went to visit Goddard, and I said, I'm home. I mean, they were studying everything from Frank Zappa's work to, they had a guy teaching Taoist philosophy. I mean, somebody who really was a Taoist. And I learned about education. We had small classes, 5, 6, 7 people, living communally. And it opened my eyes to a bigger world. And Goddard, I thank God every day I went there.
Well, then you went on, you got your PhD at Union, and then you were certified as a Jungian analyst in New York and studied intensively with Robert Lange, so very, very famous among others. But you didn't go to Zurich, you chose to do your Jungian studies in New York. So let's get right to what your specialty is. You work in patterns of behavior and form. You refer to these as fields or archetypes. What are you talking about?
Remember the Woody Allen movie, Annie Hall? And he and Annie Hall are sitting on a park bench one day watching people go by. And they watch people, and Woody Allen says, here's the story of this couple. Just by watching how they walk, how they talk, and how they touch each other, don't touch each other. And that's always been a way of life for me. Always just watching things. And it's sort of a curse and a blessing in that when you look at for me, when I look at a given situation, it's like seeing multitudes of experiences behind it, the kind of things that got you to this point, the kind of dynamics that are part of your life. And so I was infused with the sense of something a lot bigger than what we see, that you're really embedded in a much larger domain. And to understand this, I began doing studies in many different fields, from physics to some mathematics to zoology, embryology, because I wanted to see, how do people understand these things that grow, these patterns? And then I began to understand that the pattern as we see it is not an autonomous thing. I thought it was just a pattern, let me just understand the pattern. But then when you begin to see the pattern is an expression of some underlying drama. I mean, it's sort of a no-brainer, but it took me a while to get there. And then when you can understand the pattern, you can understand so much about one's life.
And Jungians sometimes go to fairy tales or an archetype of the hero or the princess, or you know, or whatever, to explain this. Is that, am I on the right track here?
Exactly, because what it is, we tend to look at our life, and psychologists tell us that we're this way because of our past, our parents, and all that. Well, of course that's a part of it. But I'm never content with the notion that we are the way we are because of antecedent facts, because of our upbringing. It's a major part. But when you begin to see a life has some consistent properties to it, from childhood to adolescence, up until your 80s, there's something. And that's the other hit for me with this work. I realized that we are embedded in patterns, like a fairy tale. And you begin to see, well, this is a Cinderella tale somebody's involved in. This is the Pinocchio tale or whatever. And you begin to find in some uncanny ways that the individual draws to them people that will fulfill that drama. And the other thing that's exciting and also a dark side of these findings is that on one hand, when you can understand that you really can help somebody make a change, and to see that a person is embedded in some eternal drama. That's a gift.
Right. Now, you as a psychoanalyst can probably see the drama someone's in. How do we know if we are being influenced by an archetype or a story, or is there a way that we as lay people can, or do we need to go to a specialist, or what are some of the dynamics that work when we're, if we're interested to look? Maybe it's just looking.
Well, it's look at two simple things. Well, simple. One is look at what really moves you in your life. What's the thing that really moves this individual? It could be working with flowers or plants. It could be interviewing people like this. It could be wanting to look at patterns. And number one, you begin to see that it probably is an expression of some kind of destiny in one's life. It's a pattern that they're in. The other thing on the darker side is when you begin to see that there's some kind of behavior or tendency you have that no matter where you go, it expresses itself. Look at replicative patterns. Look at how you find yourself engaged in the same kind of issues with your boss, with your husband, with your wife, with your kids, with your teacher, with your analyst. And you know what? It's the same drama many times. And that's where we begin. I mean, one should at that point say, what am I caught in? And that's the thing I'm finding with this work, that these patterns, in many ways, these archetypal patterns are larger than us. And they have a way of just absorbing the individual into them. And you don't even know it. And it's like you're on a runaway train sometimes. They're creative, but if you don't have some kind of way to negotiate with it, you're going to be taken over, and life gets much more difficult and at times dark, very dark.
So what might be a common one that somebody gets caught up in that might show up at work and at home? I mean, you know, everybody is picking on me, or, I mean, could it, victim thing, is that the kind of thing?
Well, say a pattern of abandonment. Okay? I mean, many people live with abandonment. If that's your core issue, you know what begins to happen in their life, that their life is centered around this theme. And they're going to do two things, generally. On one hand, they're going to engage in relationships where they're going to try to hold on to somebody so desperately that they don't go away. But the other part that they don't catch is they're going to be pushing away people. So, but I thought you were going to be there for me. You start subtly pushing away. And what happens then is it's a highly choreographed drama where they will find somebody that most likely will have an Achilles heel around that issue, and they'll start sparring with you and say, I knew you were going to betray me, I knew you were going to leave me, well, I knew you were going to start trouble with me, and the drama goes until somebody can say, what are we doing? What are we doing? But see, this is the power that's got me with this work, that these patterns are so pervasive that they take over. They actually consume individuals into them. And when you look at it that way, you realize the patterns are innate and independent of the individual. The individual seems to dip into this drama, but the properties of the pattern run as though they have their own choreography. And we then are asked to, to run with it,